Hello everyone and welcome to whatever this video is going to become. My name is Zarina and today we're going to be going over all the books that I read for the month of October. The amount of times that it took me to remember to say October and not like forget what month it was. We're now in October, people. We're almost there. I swear I'm going to be caught up before the end of the year. I hope I didn't just jinx it because of my curse of things being on time. Hold on. Those aren't wood, but it's the thought that counts. Yes, we're also gonna have to excuse the glasses and no makeup combo. It's been really windy around my area and I have pretty bad allergies, as well as I'm on a medication called Accutane, which if some people who have a lot of acne know, it makes your skin so dry. So the combo of wind, allergies, and dry skin, the idea that I even have to cleanse my face tonight is horrific. So for the month of October, I read 6 books. And I think this is the first month where I actually have all the books that I read on hand with me. So yay for that. And before I blab on for too long, let's just get started. So actually, before I do begin, I do want to mention, sometimes I'm harsh. It's nothing against the authors. It's just that this is my opinion. And unfortunately, sometimes I don't like something. So now that we've prefaced, let's actually get started. So the first book that I read for the month of October was Daughter of Smoke and Bone by Laini Taylor. I was so excited to finally get to this book because I swear I've been wanting to read this book forever. I got into reading like more diverse authors in high school because I used to just like read Rick Riordan and reread his books over and over again. But I started seeing this book around high school and I just never got a chance to pick it up. I will tell you, going into this, I had absolutely no idea what was going to happen because unfortunately this book falls prey to the having no description anywhere on the book in lieu of having quotes about how amazing this book is. So I really went into it having absolutely no idea. And from the cover, I just thought, low-key, I never looked it up. I like to know as little as possible for the most part going into books. I'm so sorry about the light on my glasses. Oh, you know what? Let me move it. Hold on. Okay, that's better. If it was driving you nuts, it's a little bit better now. It was driving me nuts as well. So yeah, I saw this cover and I was like, yeah, it's gotta be some kind of like YA girl goes to prom and it's a masquerade ball, like Cinderella retelling. I don't know why in my brain that's what I made up this book being about, and it is definitely not correct. Before I forget, I rated this book a 4.25 stars. I really enjoyed it. There's a couple reasons why I didn't, but I'll get into that. Yeah, so I had no idea that this book had any form of fantasy elements, like literally at all. Like genuinely no clue. So when I got into it and the magical parts of it started to come out, it took me a really long time to process that. I'm like, oh, we are in a fantasy world. Oh, okay, this is happening. And I think that made the beginning a little slow for me. I didn't actually dock points for that. There's something else. But if you've never read the series, basically the main character, she's trying to live life as a regular art student in Prague, but she also just happens to run these errands for like this mysterious beast creature that happens to be like her adoptive father. Wacky stuff. I can't really say too much about that situation because it'd be spoiling the plot. But yeah, that's kind of like the basic premise. I thought the twists in this book were really good. A lot of them were like wild, but they weren't so far out of the realm of possibility where it has you kind of being like, why is that happening? Like that doesn't make sense. Like everything made sense and it was pretty fun to read a book like that because I really had no idea where this book was going. I did at some point find some of the writing style to be a little bit dense, but that's also just because I have this like meter. Like if we're talking about regular life that we live in, text can be more dense and I can function just fine, but the more fantasy the world is, the more dumbed down the language needs to be for me, because like my brain is trying to process what type of reality it is. So it's like this sliding scale of where fantasy is and like the language. So there were points where it was a little bit dense and I had to process. I didn't really remove points for it because like that's probably just me. And it definitely didn't help that I kept forgetting the book. I'm like, oh, there's fantasy elements, there's fantasy elements, there's fantasy elements. I also really enjoyed the female main character. I'm really terrible with names. So anyone who knows me is not surprised the fact that I cannot remember a single person's name. But she was really enjoyable. She was really strong. I feel like all of her motivations made sense why she was like throughout the story, so I never felt like, oh, I don't really agree with her ever. The one I did have a problem with, and that knocked the most points off for this book, was the male main character. His story, he felt like he was kind of just there to serve the female main character, but there are like chapters from his perspective, so it, for me, didn't feel like he had as much conflict, and because of that, he was kind of boring. He has conflict throughout the whole thing, but it's like the same conflict, if that makes sense. Like, there isn't really something that keeps his story moving. Yeah, and I felt that I was really bored with him, and he got kind of annoying for some parts. Overall story was interesting enough where that didn't really bother me. So unfortunately, there's another part that usually would knock off points for me, but didn't because it was really well done. Unfortunately, I cannot talk about that part because it would be a really major spoiler. So if you want me to do a spoilery review of this book instead of a spoiler-free, let me know, because I could talk about the ending of this book. If you do want to see that, I think I'm going to put it after I finish the series. I only currently have the first book, so it's gonna be a hot second. But if you do want to see that, I'm open to doing it. But I would actually suggest to read these books because they were a lot of fun. I'm surprised that I haven't read a fantasy world like it because this book has been out for a while now. But I'm glad I haven't because it was really refreshing to go into. Oh my gosh, and I just saw in my notes, the end is wild. The end, if I already didn't plan on picking up the second book from the rest of the book, the end, 25 pages. It's been a while since a book did me like that. Mark Vadina by Rick White. So I do read a lot of middle grade. This is making me realize how much middle grade I read, but now officially moving on. Let's go. So talking about the fact that I read tons of middle grade, the next book is Fablehaven Rise of the Evening Star by Brandon Mull. This is the second book in the Fablehaven series, and this is probably one of my favorite series from when I was a kid, other than the Kane Chronicles and like Magnus Chase. And if you've never heard of Fablehaven, basically Kendra and Seth are siblings, and one summer their parents have to drop them off at their grandparents' house, except these grandparents they don't really interact with much and they don't really know anything about them. They're known for being really reclusive, and when they show up to their grandparents' house, not everything is quite as it seems, and turns out that they run a preserve for magical creatures, and kind of the shenanigans that Kendra and Seth fall into when they can't follow the rules. This series is a lot of fun. When I say like fairy tales, I don't really mean like Disney fairy tales. I'm talking about like myths and legends from like around the world. So think dragons, ogres, witches, like a bunch of demons. Really, really cool and dark stuff for a middle grade series. I love them as a kid, mainly because I was always obsessed with like the occult and like ghosts and stuff. And then I also happen to have a really big fascination in like fairy tales. So a perfect mix. This is as I mentioned, the second book, and it is just as fun as the first one. I still love Kendra and Seth's dynamic in this. It's still very snappy, very realistic to two siblings, especially one who's like a know-it-all older sister and an annoying younger brother. I don't have a younger brother, I have a younger sister, but the feeling at this age was much the same. My younger sister, who wasn't a big fan of reading, actually really likes these books. She never finished them just because I lost the fifth book. Sorry, sister. Yeah, if you see my other videos, you know my fifth book, I was reading it at Walt Disney World while I was waiting in lines, and one time I had gotten a snack from one of the carts and I was eating it at a table, and I left the book and then I went to go throw it away and I came back and my book was gone. And it made me very sad. The whole series is a lot of fun, but this one specifically, I don't feel like it moved a little bit slower than the first one, and it wasn't as tightly like wrapped up nicely. I think mainly because the world gets a lot bigger in this, because I feel like the first book is really based on just their grandparents' preserve, versus this one, it's really cool. Like the world of Fablehaven is so cool, and like I, especially as a kid, was obsessed with books where like it was the normal world, but if you just looked close enough, if you just met the right people, it was quite as it seemed. Like these, like Percy Jackson, that kind of vibe, and these, oh my god, they're so good. Yeah, I loved all the characters. There's a bunch of new characters that are introduced, and those are really fun. However, there's one slight warning. There are a couple jokes in this one and the first one that are a bit a product of their time. I believe these were written in the early 2000s. There is like a really weird like crush dynamic that happens. Yeah, I definitely did not notice it as a kid, and it's not something they push very hard. It just mentions it, and I was reading it and I was like, oh, that's a little weird, but I don't think it takes away from the overall story. Like I understand why that was there, and like due to the myths and legends, like that kind of makes sense, but at the same time I was like, ooh, do we need to? No we didn't. Yeah, so I would definitely keep an eye out for that. It's just a little strange, that's all. Yeah, it was really funny because before reading this, I literally did not remember the plot of this book. I remember the plot of the first one really well, and the last one, but for some reason this one I was like, the only thing I remember is Like right in the beginning, there's something about this specific frog that's on the front, and that's like literally the only plot line I remember from the entire book. And there's like so many, and I was like, nope, none of those happened in this book. It's all just about this frog. I don't know. Anyway, time to move on. Guys, I don't know how I keep roping myself into it, but I somehow read another Cassandra Clare book, and that was Swordcatcher. And guys, I don't know why I keep doing this to myself. I used to use the excuse that it was because it was a Shadowhunters book and I just need to see how the Shadowhunter world play out. I should have not finished this book. I'm not gonna lie. Before I get too into kind of bashing this book, I will tell you what I did like. Cassandra Clare has a talent for writing political societies, kind of just like, and political tension. That I think was getting me through most of the book, and when those things kind of took a lull, it made the book incredibly difficult to read. Also, I feel like the book should have been much shorter for many reasons, but one of the main reasons is the politics happening in the background should have been shortened. I feel like this book was almost like half a story, if that makes sense. But the political side of things was interesting. Now on to the things I didn't like, which is a much longer list. So first of all, I'm going to start with the beginning of the book. This book has nearly a 50-page prologue, at least in my copy. And I personally am of the belief that most prologues in books are useless. I feel like I don't really mind when it's like a 1-page, 2-page, like a specific detail that just, you can kind of tell like, okay, you need to know this, but I also don't see where like it'd fit into the story, or like a poem to set the tone or something like that. But 50 pages? That's pushing it. Especially when books just introduce that information later in the book. Like, why did I need to know that beforehand? Like, why either start the story there, or get rid of your prologue and just find another way to get that information in. And this prologue was so useless, you guys. Like, literally, it was not only was it the most boring 50 pages of the book, and yeah, you're like 50 pages. Most people, I feel like if you're not used to reading Cassandra Clare's writing and you don't come to read this book after reading Shadowhunters, I don't understand why you would pick up another one of her books, because it literally took 50 pages to get through the prologue, and then it took another 50 pages in chapter 1. Well, chapter 1 I don't think is that long, but it took another 50 pages to even get the story started. So like, if you're not like me and one of those people who just like keeps holding on, hoping that the series will be like the Infernal Devices, that's the second one, right?
Portal Instruments, Infernal Devices, Dark Artifices, yes!
Like, you just hold on hope that they're gonna be the same beauty that the Infernal Devices were, and unfortunately, like, it's not. And one of the reasons that this prologue did suck was because literally the information in the first 50 pages was just repeated in the next 50 pages. And then on top of that, after we get out of the like first guy's perspective, every other character is repeating details so often about the same people in the same rooms, and it's like the same thing. Like, yes, we know that this room has gold trim. Yes, we know that that person is known for doing this. Like, it was so annoying, and this book could have been so much shorter. Yes, and then another thing is, the characters weren't really that interesting. Their life situations were interesting, if that makes sense, but other than being like signifiers for their like that specific person in their society, I don't feel like I know a single thing that would make me personally like relate to any of them. Like, as I said, the situation that's going on is interesting. I don't know, it just felt like they weren't there. Like, they were kind of non-existent. I was reading comments on the Last Hours trilogy, which I ended up enjoying the story of, just not the characters, and someone was like, yeah, it's because the characters are just kind of like slowly like washed down versions of her earlier characters, and unfortunately that is what it feels like. And then I think this story, LOL, my sister called me and I low-key forgot what I was talking about, but the characters weren't very strong, and I feel like if you're gonna have a book this long and have me spend this much time with the characters, I feel like I should know a little bit more about them than I feel like I did. Yeah, and then on top of that, the storyline moved really slowly. It just felt like a lot of waiting for things to happen, waiting for things to happen, waiting for things to happen, and much less in the actual place of having things happen. Yeah, and I just remembered something else about the prologue. So another reason that I feel like the prologue could have been beneficial is there's this other character that the main guy is friends with in the prologue, and he literally does not show up at any point in the book, like ever. And if you might have a better experience knowing that, but because I was expecting this guy to come back in some shape or form, I feel like it made the plot more boring for me, because I was like, when's this guy coming back? When's this guy coming back? And he never did. Like, he literally just like is in the first 50 pages of the prologue, and then he like disappears. Which, like, there might be a point later, but as a reader currently, maybe there's something I missed, but it felt so pointless. It just was so pointless, and it wasted my time, and I'm not a fan of books wasting my time. Apparently I read online that there's going to be at least 4, and I don't know if I'm gonna make it through the 4th one. I just know at least I'm going to be reading the next one. I did end up rating this a 3.75. I'm not exactly sure why. Maybe I did it when it was late at night. Maybe I meant 2.75. No, you know what? The writing was decently solid, so I could understand a 3.75. It just, I don't know. Like, her books used to, like, hit, like, solid, really, like, high 4s for me, and now they're just... The next book that I read for the month, I also gave a 3.75, and that was Vampires of El Norte by Isabella Cañas. For a romance, it wasn't giving enough romance, but it also was thrillery, and it wasn't giving me thriller at first. The first half of the book, the suspense and the thriller elements just didn't really get to me. That the main girl, Nena, she lives on Hacienda. Her dad is the overseer for the whole thing, and her family is like the overseeing family. And she falls in love with one of the farmhands, and they go exploring one night, and she almost ends up dying. She doesn't die, and he runs away because he doesn't want to face the fact that she's dead. But later he ends up coming back and then dealing with... She thinks he ran away. He thought she was dead. That's kind of like their scenario. But there's also vampires, and they're hunting down people on these haciendas. It was decently interesting. I've never read anything by this author before, so I feel like it was a good introduction, I guess, to her stuff. I overall enjoyed it. Yeah, but definitely in the beginning, the suspense wasn't suspensing. I was kind of like, okay, this is a little silly. Like, I didn't really understand it until the second half of the book, where like some of the situations and area changes, and I'm like, oh, okay, now I'm actually nervous. I felt like slight thrills. I don't think this was very high on the thrill scale, but yeah, the romance was cute. The characters were fine. I don't know what it was, but there was something missing for me to push it up into like a 4-star at least. Yeah, also the guy, there's this one decision he makes that I found was kind of silly, and I just couldn't unthink of it of being silly, especially because it's supposed to be a really serious moment, and I was like, sure, you know what, you go for it. I'm okay with you guys ending up. Yep, perfect, okay. I didn't write much about this book. I did like read it decently fast. Yeah, for October, for spooky season, this was fun. This was my thriller. So guys, we've done it again. We have finally made it to the end of the month, and the last thing I read for the month was Avatar: The Last Airbender: The Promise. This is ignore the sticker from the used bookstore. This is the first book in a trilogy of comics that take place immediately after the show Avatar: The Last Airbender ends, which I don't know if you can see my Avatar: The Last Airbender box set, but I love Avatar. I've been a really big fan of it. It's really funny because I didn't actually watch it live while it was on TV. I don't know, I just was like right outside the age range for it when it was on television, or like, I don't know what happened, but I ended up watching it on a streaming service like in middle school, and I was like, yeah, this is the show. And it still is. It's fantastic. But now on the comic, the art is gorgeous. If you love the show, the art from the show, you're gonna love the art from the comic. The one thing I did have was you could tell very early in the comic, it felt more like they were doing storyboards for television, and a lot of the story elements felt really choppy, because like I feel like reading it, I could imagine how it would work in the TV show, but as a comic, as someone who does love reading manga and comics, it felt really, I don't know, you'd read like, it would be like a whole scenario on one page, and you flip the page and there's somewhere else with different people, and I felt like it really took me out of the reading experience. I would have loved to see those pieces maybe expanded a bit more, rather than, it also didn't help that there was some like big time gaps, but then after like there's like one major time gap, after that it runs more smoothly. The pacing got a better hold, but that's all I really have to say. Like, it was a good time. It's so good to see these characters again. I'm really excited to see that, I believe that the original animators are working on a movie where they're like older, so it's like the time in between these comics and The Legend of Korra, and I'm so excited. Like, you guys, especially recently with how many like how many sequels and redos we keep getting, I'm done with the sequels and the redos and going back to the same worlds. Avatar is an exception. Yes. So I'm very excited to see what they end up doing with that I believe they've already casted the voice actors. I've been trying not to pay attention to it because I don't want to get my hopes up in case something happens. So yeah, so with that, we have made it to the end of the month. Thank you so much for watching. If you're not subscribed and you want to see more from me, please hit the subscribe button. I really appreciate it. Yes, and if you don't want to subscribe but you like the video, I would really appreciate it if you left a like. It would mean a lot. Please and thank you. Also, what are you reading right now? What do you want to read? It's December. What do you want? What's your most anticipated book for 2025? Whatever you want to say. I honestly love responding to comments, so please write something in the comments. Comments. Okay, that's all. Bye-bye. I'm really done with let's pray I can get through this title because I've tried to say it like 6 times and it has not worked. So talking about how much middle grade I read, the next book is Fable.